Have to cut and paste later.
Hello, welcome along. Rod might be wandering off to find his book, but that's all right.
Yeah.
We've convinced him to stay. Welcome along. This isn't, I was going to say, it feels like it's almost the first one for the year because we missed last week and whatever, but we're back. So, exploring some thoughts from Andrew Root's Churches in the and the Crisis of Decline. Comes up backwards on mine, so I can't see. So, I think I said last week, so he has sort of a dialogue between Karl Barth, German theologian, and sort of looking at his development of thought around the ideas that Andy's talking about, crossed with a fictional church called St. John the Baptist, as they're struggling. And eventually in the story, they've sort of, the denomination sold them and it's become a restaurant. And it's sort of, if we went back and something changed, what would have happened? And so in that fictional church, there, one of the ladies that sort of is leading one of the branches, because there's sort of two divergent things of this is where we need to head, is a woman called Sue. And so as part of his story, he tells of Sue's at home one day and she's opens up Facebook, and on her site is a little, you get those little things in your timeline, memory from 3 years ago. And she looks at it and it's a picture of her and her friend Magda at Chartres Cathedral. Been to Chartres?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, twice.
Oh, this is all going to sound very familiar to Rod. Rod will be able to picture it.
I can picture it, but you're going to talk about inside, I'm sure.
And so she then remembers back to this journey. So I'm going to read a bunch out. Just enjoy the story. Sue and Magda had survived Sue's Picasso meltdown. So they'd been to a Picasso museum the day before and she had hated it. I got about 2 minutes in and went, this is rubbish, and walked out. So they'd survived the meltdown and spent the following day at Orsay Museum with a wonderful late afternoon coffee at the Shakespeare and Company bookstore. We won't keep asking Roddy if he's been to these places, but Magda had an MA in English literature. She'd written her thesis on the lost generation, those 1920s American writers, such as Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, who had relocated to Paris after the Great War. When not in Gertrude Stein's flat, their hub was Shakespeare and Company. Sue and Magda spent a few hours taking in the busy vibe of those writers' old haunt, loving every minute of imagining themselves in 1920s. Before dinner, they bought train tickets to Chartres for the next day. They planned to spend the morning taking in one of Europe's most beautiful Gothic cathedrals, just an hour train ride outside Paris. The plan was a morning tour, lunch, and back to Paris for a late afternoon tour of the Pantheon before crossing the Luxembourg Garden for dinner at their favourite restaurant, Georgette's. All went as planned until they got back to the station for their return trip to Paris. In classic Parisian style, the conductors, without notice, had walked out, going on strike. The trains were now at a standstill, with no clue as to when they'd run again. Magda rolled with the inconvenience. Sue didn't. Luckily, they discovered that a local hotel was taking van loads of people back to Paris. They got seats, but on the third trip. They were now stuck in Chartres for the next 6 hours. Sue was frustrated. She was annoyed. She was stuck waiting for a van with no other way back, and she was disappointed that they would miss out on dinner at Georgette's. With few options, they decided to return to the cathedral. Needing a place to sit, they figured it was as good an option as any other. Magda walked the perimeter of the grand building, reviewing the stained glass again, checking panels against her guidebook. Sue just sat, too agitated to do anything but stew in her frustration. She needed some space lest another Picasso-type meltdown ensue. She sat and sat. She told herself the agitated stories about where her energy should be spent. She tortured herself with should be. She told herself she should be anywhere but here, in this cathedral, in this little town. That wasn't the plan. Her exasperated narrative was interrupted when a small group of people sat 4 pews ahead of her. She watched them pray and embrace. Though unable to understand French, she could still understand their pathos. Watching them caused something to shift in Sue. She stopped propelling her imagination forward and just sat, allowing herself to just be in time, not race through it. Eventually, the space started to do something to Sue. Her frustration disappeared. Her anxiousness left. She found that she was just there, just breathing and being, calm. After an hour of just sitting and resting, she felt something reach for her. It came upon her with compassion and promised peace. It was full. It was a gift. She felt mainly gratitude for being there in that space and for just being alive. In waiting with the frustration gone, she felt found. It was one of the more holy moments of Sue's life. She ended up sitting there for 4 hours. She was waiting, not for minutes to be peeled away, but to rest in a kind of fullness of time. In the fullness of time, the gifts of the world were given to her. She could simply be in the world, not possess it. She found herself thinking about her son and granddaughter. She prayed for them. She found herself praying, something that was not easy for her. Inside that memory, Sue realized that she did know how to help Woz find God. She wondered how she'd forgotten about that experience. She wondered why it hadn't framed her life as much as it should have. The imminent frame was powerful enough to crop out such deep happenings. She somehow had become too busy to let that experience form her. But now that Woz had arrived, she decided she wouldn't forget it again. So again, Woz is this grandson of one of the old ladies that had been part of the church and the Bible study, and she's died, and he's gone to try and get them to show them, how do you find God? And so Sue's first reaction to that was, well, do we know how to find God? And now she's having this memory. So have you ever had an experience like that where you maybe been forced to stop, or you've decided to stop and just experience God in some way as Sue experienced?
I was just trying to, there it is. Not my notebook, but the cathedral in Chartres, or however you want to
Yes.
pronounce it, has a very large labyrinth.
Yes.
And so that certainly gives you a time to stop and slow down, despite the time limitations that you have when you're on tours and people wanting you to be here, be there, be out, and whatever else. There was certainly opportunity there of saying, no, we're going to do this without rushing it. Of course, you could rush a labyrinth if you really want to, but we did and didn't rush it. We did it and brought it home. And yes, that was an opportunity, probably in a little different circumstances. We weren't in a finding ourselves disappointed or frustrated with anything. It was just a time to slow down. We were fortunate with good company, and as we walked the perimeter, we had a joyful time there as well. So I didn't answer your question, just tell you about Chartres as a cathedral. Yep.
Yep.
It
Yep.
was a place that we did have a chance of slowing down just because of that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've told you the story before of, when I was at Youth Workers in Service years ago at Alexandra Park, and they had the labyrinth there, which I'm pretty sure the design was based on Chartres. And yes, that ability to walk that and to slow down, and yes, which I often think, wouldn't it be nice to buy one of those? But I've never got round to it.
I can photocopy a very short, very small version of it for you.
I think it's a couple down in South Australia do them on big canvas type things. Like
Right.
$1,000 or something, but I just sit there go, yeah, that would be nice.
Mm. But we did a few at Mount Cravat over the years on the floor in the hall, draw it
Yeah.
up. Wasn't as relaxing drawing it up as actually walking it.
Yeah. The Hunter Presbytery used to have one that, yeah, was on the big sheet that you could roll out. So maybe one day we'll think about it. Kylie, have you had an experience like that?
Probably not recently, but when I'm on my own and at the beach or at a river, somewhere out in nature, and you just actually stop and try to block everything out, like your to-do lists and everything. And there's been times like that.
Cool. It's interesting. We were in our team meeting this morning and reflecting on the Bible reading for Sunday, which is the young man slash young ruler slash rich young ruler, depending on which gospel you read, coming to ask Jesus what he needs to do to get eternal life. And that sense of that invites us as this reading that's sort of first Sunday of Lent. You know, what are those things that, you know, get in the way of us connecting with God and stuff like that? So Andrew said, you know, well, what are the things that you do that help you in Lent to connect? And I'm like, nothing. I'm a good Baptist. We don't do things like Lent. We just carry on. So yes, it's how do we find those opportunities? And yes, how do we maybe take seriously Lent and go, yes, I'm going to find a space to stop. Like he was talking about going bush. He's going to take some time to get out in the bush and stuff like that. That's your thing?
There was a similar, not a similar time, but a similar, to answer your question, example when we were in the cathedral of all places, in Chester. And Chester wasn't a place that either of us wanted to actually stay until we got there and walked around and just found this beautiful city, beautiful, you know, history to go through. We went into the cathedral mid-afternoon, I guess, and as usual, cathedrals got so much to look at. They want you to look here and there, and memorials, English ones, memorials to this battle or that battle or this defense force, etc. So the things there that we were interested in, but I went to the very back, looking at a stained glass window. Must have been on the western side, at the back. The churches, they normally east-west, aren't they? North-south, with the cross going across east-west. But anyway, this one seemed to have the light shining in the stained glass window at the back of the church, and it happened to just the light was on Diana in the seats around her, sitting at the back, in the back aisles of the church. And it was a really lovely just time to sit back and say, just look at that, the light shining on her in particular, but just for me to be able to see that coming through that back of the window. Or they had a big light outside. One of the two. I thought it was the sunlight, to be authentic. So that was a really sit back and just think about that experience. I was going to say something else, but I can't think of. On your comment about how do we connect with God, I came across, and I think whether it was Monday or Sunday, an ABC program. I think it's called We as Christians or something like that. And there's two, and they've got having a bunch of people together. It was Australian though, but one of these get people together and talk about, they were in a house for a week or whatever. Nice. And there was a bunch of Christians, but it included a Mormon. I didn't identify anyone there claiming to be uniting. There was Catholic. What's that? Coptic, is it?
Yep, could be.
But the
Orthodox.
Sorry.
Or Coptic Orthodox.
The Egyptian, Coptic Orthodox. Yep. And there are a few things like that. And so one of the discussion, this one, only two in it. I'm going to go back and look at the other one. I only saw this halfway through. One issue was the girl who was of Mormon teaching, saying, I feel I am Christian. Why don't you accept me? And I guess in many ways over time, that became that question, how do we connect with God?
Yep.
People had problems with her, they didn't say her teachings, things in her denomination that said, oh, you're not. And so it was interesting discussion going through that. And there were those people that wanted the Pentecostal and whatever else. So it was interesting at the end, all friendly, but didn't quite cope with it. There was people that had very bad experiences with church and not. So it was a good, maybe, well, I enjoyed that part of how do we connect with God? And she was, or with Jesus is our question, I guess, not just with God, but otherwise we'll be looking the same as from a Jewish and a Muslim Islamic perspective. This was how do we connect with Jesus?
Yeah.
Was the question coming through with those one. Am I Christian? Am I Jesus follower, etc. So for you or for the viewers / listeners, maybe I think it was we as Christians or something along those lines. ABC.
I'll have to look it up.
Yes,
Ratings
ABC Ivo.
will suddenly boost for them. Yeah, and yeah, how do we learn from others? And particularly coming from a Baptist background, but I think generally across the Protestant church in the last few decades, it's been how do we actually discover some of those connections that the Catholics have? That we sort of went, oh, we don't do that because that's Catholic, and we're suddenly going, oh, actually, this is quite helpful. So, yes.
Yep.
Things like labyrinths and stuff like that. No. So, and I think the interesting thing from this story is obviously it was the picture that sparked her memory of this event. So how do we keep records? So how do you take that lovely picture of Diana sitting with the sun behind her coming through the stained glass window so you can go back to that or whatever it is, you know? How do we become more deliberate in doing something that will remind us? And I've gone on this track before, you know, the whole Abraham, you know, when he gets somewhere, he builds an altar so that when they go past again, they can go, oh, God met me here. Yes, so maybe this story encourages us to do some of that as well. Because, so as I said, his thinking is we get caught up in the secular age of being busy and trying to do more and invent more, and maybe part of it is to wait on God. And sort of he's unpacking that, and it's not just I sit there and do nothing. It can be an active waiting of connecting with the world, which reminds me of what we did, or Jock did with the Meg. It's like, how do we sit there and listen to what God's doing in the world around us, where God is active, where do we need to be active, that sort of thing. So it's not just we're going to sit here and do nothing as a church, as Southside, for the next year and just hear where God is. No, but it's that connecting and deliberately trying to connect with God. So you'll get some sort of message on Friday evening about encouraging the boys and the girls to be finding ways to connect with God this year, and that we'll be trying to find ways to connect them with God. So prepare for it.
Excellent.
Andrew's excited about being there on Friday. He said, give them something to do. So,
well, hopefully doing that tonight. So, giving him something, giving him and identifying everyone else. Yep,
excellent.
Things to do.
So yes, I'll pass that on. He wants something to do. So
you should sidestep at the beginning and say, hey, Andrew, you take the colours. That'll give him something to do and talk about for the next little bit.
Just take the colours, make sure you do them in the right order.
Right, and put him in the right way and all that, and walk away. Yeah.
Don't tell him what
and
the right
do the
order
girls
is.
as well.
And do the girls. Yeah, no, we've got to look after him first time, give him second time.
Yes. That's good.
He might be watching this tomorrow, so careful.
Well, who knows? Could have been here with us tonight, but no. Cool. So that's some thinking for us to do. How do we get those moments? I guess particularly through Lent. Are there moments that we need to reflect back on? And how do we become more deliberate in photographing, memorializing those moments so that we can return to them? So thanks for your thoughts. I'll stop recording.